April 29th, 1945, a forest floor south of Munich. The air is thick with the smell of damp pine needles and defeat. For 19-year-old Flakhelferin Liesel Vogt, the world has shrunk to the rhythmic crunch of her boots on wet leaves and the frantic pounding of her own heart. The thunder of the American artillery, once a distant, terrifying drumbeat, is now a constant, ground-shaking roar that seems to come from every direction at once. Her gray-green Luftwaffe uniform, once a source of pride, is now just heavy, sodden wool, caked with the mud of Bavaria. Her unit, a disparate collection of teenage girls and weary old men pulled from the local folkstorm, has simply ceased to exist. It hadn't been destroyed in a heroic battle. It had evaporated, dissolving into the forest like morning mist. Her rifle, a Karabiner 98K, feels impossibly heavy. She hasn't fired it in days. There is no one left to give the orders, no target to acquire in the smoke-filled gloom. There is only the retreat. They move in a ragged line, a dozen of them, following a grizzled Feldwebel whose face is a roadmap of exhaustion. Among them is Clara, a stern, quiet nurse in her late 30s, who carries her medical bag as if it were a holy relic, and 17-year-old Hanna, whose tear-streaked face is a portrait of pure terror. Hanna had been a signals assistant, a blitzmädel, whose only job was to connect phone lines. She had never imagined the war would find her here, in this dark, dripping forest. A sound slices through the cacophony of the cannons, the distinct mechanical rattle of a vehicle engine, close by, too close. The Feldwebel throws up a hand, and the small group freezes, melting behind the thick trunks of pine trees. Liesel's breath catches in her throat. She presses herself against the rough bark, the scent of resin sharp in her nostrils. Through the dense foliage, she sees it, a dull olive-drab shape lumbering down a muddy track they hadn't realized was so near. It's a Jeep, an American Willys, its canvas top down despite the drizzle. 4 men are inside, helmets low, rifles held casually but ready. They are impossibly large, their confident posture a stark contrast to the Germans' hunted fear. The Feldwebel makes a decision born of pure desperation. He knows there is no escape. The front has collapsed. Behind them is only chaos, and ahead, the Americans. He steps out from behind his tree, his hands raised high above his head. "Nicht schießen," he croaks, his voice cracking. "Don't shoot." The Jeep screeches to a halt. The Americans leap out, fanning into a practiced professional semicircle. They are soldiers of the 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, veterans of Sicily and Anzio. They have seen everything. Their movements are fluid, economical. One of them, a sergeant with a square jaw and tired eyes, shouts an order in a language Liesel barely understands. The meaning, however, is clear. One by one, the others emerge from the trees, hands held aloft. Liesel's rifle slips from her numb fingers, clattering onto the soft earth. The sound feels like a final punctuation mark on her life as a soldier. Hanna begins to sob, a low, wretched sound. Clara moves to her side, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder, her own face an unreadable mask of stone. The Americans methodically disarm them, their efficiency impersonal, almost bored. They seem less like the monstrous demons of Dr. Goebbels' radio broadcasts, and more like tired factory workers at the end of a long shift. But Liesel feels a cold dread creeping up her spine. She has heard the stories, the whispers passed from soldier to soldier, the official warnings about what happens to German women who fall into enemy hands. The stories from the East were the worst, but the propaganda made no distinction. They were all the enemy. The American sergeant gestures with his M1 rifle toward the track. A larger vehicle, a GMC 2.5-ton truck, rumbles into view. Its canvas cover is pulled back, revealing an empty, cavernous bay. The order is given, a simple gesture: get in. As Liesel climbs over the tailgate, her boots slipping on the wet metal, she catches the sergeant's eye. He just looks through her, his expression weary and distant. There is no malice, but there is no kindness either. There is only the cold, hard finality of captivity. The truck lurches forward, and the forest, her last refuge, disappears behind a curtain of rain and canvas.
The journey lasts for what feels like an eternity, a jarring, bone-rattling ride into darkness. The women huddle together for warmth and comfort on the cold, vibrating floor of the truck bed, the smell of diesel fumes mixing with the stench of their own fear. They don't speak. There is nothing to say. Each is lost in her own private terror, fueled by years of relentless propaganda and the terrifying uncertainty of the present moment. Liesel watches the grim, rain-lashed landscape pass in a blur through a small gap in the canvas. Shattered farmhouses, abandoned vehicles, the detritus of a dying Reich. This is the Gotterdämmerung their leaders had promised, but it looks nothing like the heroic paintings. It is just mud and ruin and an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Sometime after midnight, the truck slows, its gears grinding as it turns off the main road. The air changes. The The smell of wood smoke and disinfectant hangs heavy, a strange, acrid perfume. The truck rolls to a stop in a large, muddy courtyard, its headlights cutting brilliant, blinding swaths through the darkness and the pouring rain. The space is a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Barbed wire, strung hastily between wooden posts, glint in the glare. American soldiers in rain-slicked ponchos move with purpose, their shouted commands in English echoing off the walls of what looks like a large agricultural school or a small barracks complex, now repurposed into a temporary POW collection point. The canvas flap is thrown open. "Raus! Out! Schnell!" a voice barks. The women scramble out, their legs stiff, their eyes struggling to adjust to the harsh, naked bulbs strung along the eaves of the buildings. The rain is cold, instantly soaking through their thin uniforms. They are herded like cattle toward a long, low building that might have once been a barn or a workshop. The sheer scale of the operation is overwhelming. Long lines of German men, their faces gaunt and gray in the flickering light, are being processed nearby, their shoulders slumped in the universal posture of the defeated. Liesel, Clara, Hannah, and about 20 other captured women, a mix of uniformed auxiliaries, nurses, and a few civilians swept up in the collapse, are separated from the men and pushed toward the entrance of the barn. Inside, the air is thick and close, smelling of wet wool, unwashed bodies, and carbolic acid. The space has been divided with rough timber and army blankets. A handful of American soldiers, overseen by a weary-looking NCO, sit at rickety tables, their paperwork illuminated by portable lamps. This is Sergeant Frank Miller. He is 21 years old, from Ohio, and he has been processing prisoners for 72 hours straight. All he wants is a cup of hot coffee and 5 minutes where no one is shouting at him. He looks at the line of terrified German women and feels nothing but a profound sense of exhaustion. To him, they are not individuals. They are a logistical problem. They are names to be written on a list, bodies to be searched, and most importantly, potential carriers of disease. Typhus, spread by body lice, is his biggest fear. An outbreak in a crowded camp like this would be a catastrophe. A translator, a German-American private whose accent is thick with the sounds of Milwaukee, begins the process. Name, rank, unit. The questions are rote, mechanical. The women answer in hushed, trembling voices. Liesel gives her name, her unit now a ghost. Clara states hers with a defiant crispness. Hannah can barely whisper her own. When it is done, Sergeant Miller stands up. He looks at the group, then gestures toward a section of the barn partitioned off by a heavy canvas sheet. Steam billows out from behind it. He speaks to the translator, his voice flat with fatigue. Tell them this is the last step, hygiene processing. Then they get blankets and a place to sleep. The translator relays the message in clipped, functional German. Last step, processing for hygiene. Then you will sleep. The words do little to reassure them. Hygiene processing. What does that mean? The women exchange nervous glances. They are exhausted, disoriented, and steeped in a deep, culturally ingrained fear of what happens when women become the spoils of war. They see the male guards, the steam, the curtained-off enclosure, and their imaginations, stoked by years of terrifying narratives, begin to run wild. Sergeant Miller, oblivious to the storm of fear brewing in front of him, just wants to get this over with. He nods to the guard at the partition, signaling for the next procedure to begin. The final, dreaded step is about to commence.
The guard pulls back the heavy canvas curtain, revealing the area behind it. It's not a chamber of horrors, but a crude, functional space. The concrete floor is damp, with wooden duckboards laid across it to keep feet out of the puddles. In the corner, a large metal drum of water steams over a fire, feeding a series of makeshift shower heads. The air is thick with the smell of lye soap, and something else, a chemical scent, sharp and unfamiliar. Along one wall are piles of coarse gray army blankets. The scene is stark, institutional, and deeply intimidating. A few female personnel are present. 2 WACs, Women's Army Corps soldiers, their faces impassive as they stand by a table stacked with supplies. But the primary authority in the room remains male. Sergeant Miller stands near the entrance with 2 other GIs, their rifles slung over their shoulders. To them, this is routine, a necessary, unpleasant chore. To the German women, the presence of these armed men in this place of forced intimacy is the confirmation of their deepest dread. Liesel's mind is a whirlwind. She remembers the posters, the radio broadcasts, the newsreels, images of depraved, subhuman Bolsheviks and vengeful Americans, their faces twisted with hate. She remembered Frau Schmidt, the wife of a local party official, giving a lecture to the League of German Girls. A German woman's purity is her honor, she had said, her voice ringing with fanaticism. It is better to die than to allow yourself to be defiled by the enemy. Now, standing on the cold, wet concrete, those words echo with a terrible, sickening resonance. Was this it? Was this the moment she was supposed to choose death over dishonor? She looks at Clara, whose jaw is set so tight it looks like it might crack. She looks at Hannah, who is trembling so violently she can barely stand. Sergeant Miller is running out of patience. The night is dragging on and more prisoners are arriving. He needs to move this group through. He turns to the exhausted interpreter. Okay, tell them. They need to be deloused. Standard procedure. Tell them to take off everything so we can dust their clothes. Everything. He emphasizes the last word, wanting to be perfectly clear. He is thinking of the lice that hide in the seams of uniforms, the knits that cling to inner layers of clothing. From a public health perspective, his order is entirely logical. The interpreter, a young private named Steiner, is just as tired as Miller. He doesn't have the energy for nuance. He turns to the women, his voice a flat monotone that carries no reassurance. He uses the most direct, literal translation he can summon. Der Sergeant befiehlt es, he says. The sergeant orders it. He pauses, looking over the line of pale, frightened faces. Alles ausziehen. Take off everything. The 4 words land in the steamy, silent room like a grenade. There is no explanation, no context, just a blunt, terrifying command delivered by an enemy soldier in the presence of other armed men. A collective intake of breath. The air crackles with unspoken horror. Liesel's blood runs cold. Alles ausziehen. It is exactly what they feared. It is the beginning of the nightmare they had been conditioned to expect since they were children. This isn't about hygiene. It's about humiliation. It's about power. It's a punishment, a violation. I feel a wave of nausea. Her gaze darts from the impassive faces of the WWIIs to the armed male guards, then back to Sergeant Miller, who is now looking at them with an expression of growing impatience. Why aren't they moving? Can't they understand a simple order? He doesn't see the terror in their eyes. He only sees insubordination, a delay in his long, miserable night. The silence stretches, taut and unbearable. Each woman is trapped in a frozen moment of decision. To obey is to submit to an unthinkable fate. To refuse, what would happen if they refused? Clara, the nurse, stands ramrod straight, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hatred and defiance. She makes a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. No. Hannah, the youngest, lets out a tiny, choked sob, a sound like a small animal caught in a trap. The command hangs in the air, an unexploded bomb, and in the suffocating silence, the fuse is burning shorter and shorter.
The fragile thread of composure finally snaps. It is Hannah who breaks first. The 17-year-old's terror, held in check by a sheer, desperate effort of will, erupts in a devastating wail. She collapses to her knees on the wet concrete, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. 9 bits and 9, she cries, her voice shrill with hysteria. Habt Gnade! Mercy, please, no! Her pleas are not for the guards, not for Sergeant Miller, but for some higher power, a desperate appeal to a universe that has suddenly become a predator. Her breakdown is a spark in a powder keg. The panic, contagious and absolute, flashes through the rest of the women. One of them, a tall, gaunt woman from a signals unit, turns and bolts for the canvas entrance, only to be blocked by a bewildered guard who grabs her arm. She struggles, screaming incoherently, her eyes wide with animal fear. Clara, the nurse, does not scream. Her reaction is one of cold, unbending fury. She takes a half step forward, shielding Hannah with her body, and glares at Sergeant Miller. Schweine, she spits, the word dripping with contempt. Pigs. Liesel is frozen, caught in the cross-currents of her own terror and the chaos erupting around her. She wants to scream, to run, to fight, but her limbs feel like lead. The scene fragments before her eyes. Hannah sobbing on the floor, the other woman struggling against the guard, Clara's face a mask of pure hate. The air is a cacophony of German pleas and curses, mixed with the confused and increasingly angry shouts of the Americans. Sergeant Miller is completely baffled. This has never happened before. He has processed hundreds of prisoners, men and women. They are usually sullen, defeated, but compliant. This is different. This is mass hysteria. What the hell is wrong with them? He yells at the interpreter, his frustration boiling over. It's just a goddamn delousing. Tell them to knock it off. His raised voice, meant to restore order, has the opposite effect. To the terrified women, his anger is not the frustration of a tired administrator. It is the fury of a predator whose commands are being defied. Private Steiner, the interpreter, tries to wade into the pandemonium, shouting to be heard over the noise. Es ist not so Entlausung, for lice, for sickness. But his words are lost, swallowed by the rising tide of fear. The women don't hear the explanation. They only hear a man yelling at them while others sob and scream. Their brains, primed for the worst, can only process one reality. They are trapped, helpless, and about to be violated. You are there, in the middle of it.
You can smell the sharp tang of fear sweat mixing with the damp wool and steam. You can feel the vibration of the concrete floor as bodies struggle and fall. The raw, primal sound of human terror is deafening. It is a scene of absolute miscommunication, a tragic opera of misunderstanding, where each side is acting on a completely different set of assumptions. The Americans see a simple, necessary health procedure being met with inexplicable, hysterical resistance. The Germans see a brutal, terrifying confirmation of their government's darkest prophecies. The situation is spiraling into violence. One of the guards, trying to restrain the woman who tried to flee, tightens his grip. She cries out in pain, further fueling the panic. Another woman starts beating her fists against the wooden wall of the barn, a rhythmic, desperate drumming that adds to the din. Miller, seeing the situation about to get completely out of hand, reaches for the sidearm on his belt, not to use it, but as an unconscious gesture of authority. The sight of his hand moving towards the pistol sends a fresh wave of terror through the prisoners. This is it. The resistance has angered them. Now comes the punishment. Just as the chaos reaches its crescendo, the canvas curtain is ripped aside with a violent rasp. A tall figure in an officer's raincoat stands silhouetted against the rainy darkness of the courtyard. He is a captain, his rank visible on his collar. He takes in the scene with a single sweeping glance. The weeping women, the panicked guards, Sergeant Miller with his hand near his weapon. His face hardens. He strides into the room, his boots slapping on the wet floor, and his voice, a sharp, authoritative crack, cuts through the noise like a whip. "Sergeant, what in God's name is going on in here?"
The captain's voice slices through the hysteria, imposing a fragile, momentary silence. He is Captain Davis, a company commander who has been in Europe since the Normandy landings. He has seen the psychological state of captured soldiers, and more importantly, he has seen the effects of Goebbels' propaganda machine firsthand. He recognizes the scent of this specific brand of terror. He looks past the confused face of Sergeant Miller and directly at the weeping women, his expression less angry than weary and discerning. "Stand down, Sergeant," he says, his voice low but firm. He turns to the other two guards. "You two step outside. Now." The guards, relieved to be escaping the incomprehensible chaos, comply immediately, disappearing back into the rainy night. Captain Davis then gestures for Miller to step back from the group, creating a crucial buffer of space. The immediate physical threat is visibly reduced. He turns to the interpreter, Private Steiner. "Son, what exactly did you tell them?" "Sir, I just told them what the sergeant said, to take off everything for delousing." Davis sighs, a deep, tired breath. He understands. "All right, Private, let's try this again. Slowly, calmly." He walks over to the table where the wax had been standing, silent and unsure. He picks up a canister, a standard-issue cardboard tube with a perforated metal top. He holds it up for the women to see. It's a duster for DDT powder, the miracle insecticide of the war. He speaks directly to Steiner, but his eyes are on the women, his tone calm and deliberate. "Tell them this." He waits for Steiner to be ready. "Tell them that I apologize for the fright. Tell them this is not a punishment." Steiner begins to translate, his voice now careful and measured. The women watch the captain, their sobs subsiding into hiccuping, watchful silence. Hannah slowly looks up from the floor. Clara's defiant glare softens into wary confusion. "This powder," Davis continues, giving the canister a gentle shake, "is to kill lice. Läuse." He uses the German word, one of the few he knows for certain. Lice carry typhus, a terrible sickness. It can kill everyone in the camp. You, me, everyone. We have to stop it. He hands the canister to one of the WACs. "Show them," he says quietly. The WAC, a young woman named Corporal Evans, understands immediately. She steps forward, turns her back to the German women, and lifts the sleeve of her own uniform shirt. She carefully dusts the inside of the fabric with the fine white powder, showing them exactly what will happen. It is a simple, non-threatening gesture, but it is more powerful than any words. "Tell them," Captain Davis says to Steiner. "They will remove their outer clothes only, their uniforms. They can keep their undergarments on. They will be given a blanket to wrap in. The WACs will dust their clothes. No men will touch them. No men will watch. Their privacy will be respected. Do you understand? Ihre Privatsphäre wird respektiert." Steiner translates, slowly and clearly, repeating the captain's promise of privacy. The words sink in. The demonstration with the powder, the removal of the male guards, the captain's calm demeanor, and the promise of privacy. It all combines to slowly dismantle the architecture of their terror. The monster of their imagination recedes.
replaced by a mundane clinical reality. A wave of understanding, followed by an immense, crushing wave of relief, washes over the women. The tension drains from the room, leaving a vacuum filled with exhaustion and shame. Hannah begins to cry again, but this time it is not from terror, but from the sheer emotional release. Clara lowers her gaze to the floor, a faint flush of color on her cheeks. She, the strong one, had been ready to fight and die over a misunderstanding about insecticide. Liesel feels her knees weaken. The entire nightmare, the perceived threat of mass rape, of degradation, was nothing more than a crude, impersonal public health measure. The order, take off everything, was not a prelude to assault, but a poorly translated, context-free instruction for preventing a typhus epidemic. The deep-seated fear, so carefully planted and nurtured by her own government's propaganda, had created a horror that existed only in their minds. Slowly, hesitantly, the women begin to comply. They shed their heavy, damp tunics and blouses, handing them to the WWIIs. They are given the coarse wool blankets, which they wrap tightly around themselves. The air fills with the faint, chalky smell of the DDT powder as Corporal Evans and the other WWIC work methodically, dusting the seams and collars of each garment. Captain Davis gives Sergeant Miller a final, meaningful look before turning and disappearing back into the night. Wrapped in her blanket, Liesel watches her gray Luftwaffe uniform jacket being treated. The white powder settles on the fabric like a fine layer of snow. The immediate fear is gone, banished by the simple, stark truth. But in its place, a different feeling begins to dawn. A cold, hollow realization of her new reality. She is no longer a soldier, no longer a citizen of the Reich. She is a number, a body to be geloused, a problem to be managed. The war, for her, is over. But her journey through its ruins, through the vast and confusing landscape of defeat, has only just begun.